They never meant for you to hear this. Not in church, not in school, not even whispered on your deathbed. But the records exist, tucked away in a climate-controlled vault beneath the Milwaukee Diocese, handwritten letters, forgotten ledgers, sealed confessions, all documenting a quiet purge behind sacred walls. 23 nuns gone, erased from history between 1854 and 1862. No graves, no bodies, just silence. And a convent that still stands, empty and echoing, by the black pines of Lake Michigan. This is not a ghost story. This is a report, smuggled from behind locked doors, a reconstruction from the pieces that weren't supposed to survive. And what we found will challenge every illusion you've been fed about sanctuary, purity, and the institutions that claim to speak for God. It began with a mansion, 30 acres of wilderness bought under the table by the Catholic Church during America's Protestant expansion. On paper, it was a religious refuge. In truth, it was an experiment, a closed system, far from scrutiny, where a new order of obedience could be tested on the willing, the chosen, the broken. 3 women led the charge: Mother Catherine, brilliant, severe, untouchable; Sister Elizabeth, soft-spoken, calculating, her voice honey-laced with poison; and Sister Margaret, herbalist, healer, and something else entirely. They were sent not just to minister, but to build a model, a microcosm of control dressed in cassocks and veils, and the young Irish novices they imported by ship, raw material, girls with no family, no voice, no escape. Disappearances were never declared. They were framed as callings, reassigned to vague missions hundreds of miles away, letters forged, belongings disposed of, prayers uttered over empty beds. But one girl, one terrified young woman, left behind a note they missed. A note found a century later in a wall cavit. During renovations. Just 8 words. They said she left. I heard her scream. Now ask yourself, what could a convent possibly need that many herbs for? You're not watching a video. You're stepping into a sealed vault of suppressed memory, and if you keep watching, you won't leave the same. The descent begins now. St. Mary's wasn't built on holy ground. That's the first lie. The land it sat on had a history long before the church arrived, a history soaked in blood and buried under treaties no one honored. The native Potawatomi called it Mateguanan, place where the trees do not sleep, a grove where elders refused to set camp, where hunters returned wide-eyed and silent, where even birds kept their distance. But the church didn't care. They wanted isolation, control, a place to remake the mind without interruption. They found it on the banks of Lake Michigan. The mansion they purchased was once the pride of a lumber baron, 3 wings of gray limestone carved from the very earth it stood upon, but the man who built it died bankrupt and raving. His journals spoke of voices in the walls, lights under the floorboards, dreams that bled into daylight. His heirs refused to enter it. The church called that superstition. They called it opportunity. When the nuns arrived, they blessed every room, twice, not once. That detail was found in Bishop Quarter's personal diary. A strange resistance to the rite, he wrote. The east wing remains cold despite fire and prayer. Sister Margaret suggests the stone retains trauma. I suspect something older, something unnamed. And yet they stayed. Mother Catherine ordered the construction of a private chapel on the northern end of the property, one never open to the public, no children allowed, no guests permitted. Its stained glass windows were imported from France, paid for in cash. The symbols etched into the panes were non-traditional, not crosses, not saints, but something older, circular, interlocked, almost serpentine. Years later, When those windows were removed for restoration, an archivist noted that one resembled a sigil found in a banned 14th century Dominican manuscript, a symbol associated not with Christ, but with Bin. Ding. You see, this wasn't about worship. It was about ritual. Everything at St. Mary's was a test of obedience. Wake at 3 o'clock a.m., pray until your knees bled, eat in silence. Confess what you hadn't done. The pain wasn't a consequence. It was the point. It broke you. It emptied you. It made room for something else. And that's where it began. The transformation. Not of the body, of the will. The church said they were forming saints, but they were building something far more useful. Servants. The disappearances didn't begin as violence. That's what makes it harder to see. No blood, no screams, just subtraction. A voice missing from morning chant, a bed left cold and made, a name erased from the duty rota with clinical precision. And it always began the same way. A summons to the North Chapel, the private one, the one with the forbidden glass. Sister Agnes was the first. She was radiant, even in humility, golden-haired, devout, barely 23, the kind of presence that unsettled those in power, not by rebellion, but by grace. When she was summoned that April morning, she went willingly. Her roommate said she looked transfixed, like something was calling her. She never returned. Mother Catherine explained the next day that Sister Agnes had been reassigned, a calling to serve in Minnesota. No details, no farewell, just a vague blessing and a locked trunk. But Sister Mary noticed something strange. Sister Agnes's rosary was still hanging on her peg, the same one her mother had carved by hand before her voyage across the Atlantic, and her cloak, thick brown wool, handmade for the Midwest cold, still draped over her cot. Who leaves for Minnesota in April without a cloak? That's when the whispers began. One by one, the younger nuns started confessing dreams. Not theirs, not exactly. Shared dreams. Each recounted the same image. A stone room with no doors. Candlelight flickering on walls carved with script they could not read. In the center, a voice. Female. Commanding. Low. Not in Latin. Not in Irish. Just old. They told Mother Catherine, and she assigned them to isolation prayer. 3 days, no food, no contact, no explanation. When Sister Bernardet disappeared weeks later, the same script unfolded. A sudden reassignment, a missing trunk, a cloak left behind. This wasn't punishment, it was selection, and it wasn't just about who was the most devout. It was about potential. The ones who questioned too much vanished, and the ones who obeyed too easily, they stayed and changed. Sister Mary later wrote that by the end of that year, half the convent no longer seemed human. Their eyes didn't blink at the same rhythm. They smiled without smiling, and when they chanted, it didn't sound like Latin anymore. Not everything they taught at St. Mary's came from Rome. Some knowledge predates the church, and they were tapping into it. By the winter of 1856, something shifted in the walls of St. Mary's, not metaphorically, physically. The nuns began to speak of sounds beneath the floorboards, scraping, breathing, a pulsing rhythm, as if the convent itself had a heartbeat. Sister Margaret dismissed it as pipes settling, but there were no pipes, no running water, just stone, earth, and something else. One novice, Sister Clare, swore she heard chanting coming from behind the chapel walls, not from the sisters, but from inside the stone itself. Not in a human tongue, she whispered during confession, but in something older than breath. 2 days later, she was gone, reassigned to a silent order in Quebec. No record of that order has ever been found. But it wasn't just the disappearances. It was the transformations. Sister Elizabeth, once warm and maternal, grew colder by the day. Her eyes, once soft, hardened into something glacial. Her voice never rose, but her presence dominated a room. Nuns began to avoid her gaze entirely, not from fear, but instinct, like prey avoiding a predator without understanding why. And then came the Black Book. Found decades later under the chapel altar, its binding stitched from some unidentifiable hide, pages filled with ink that shimmered slightly under candlelight. The language? A blend of ecclesiastical Latin and something even older, pre-Christian sigils woven between psalms. It spoke not of salvation, but of submission, not to God, but to the voice beneath the stone. The book included rituals, preparations, physical cleansing, psychological fasting, sleep deprivation. It described stages, erasure of ego, induction of obedience, and unification with the whispering presence. No mention of Christ, no mention of saints, just the Mother Superior and the silence she served. The local bishop never spoke of the book publicly, but his marginal notes, still preserved in the diocesan archives, say enough. This is not heresy, it is a schema, designed with intelligence and intent, not madness, not spiritual error. It is a machine, a human mechanism for opening something. The convent was no longer just a religious institution. It had become a ritual engine, and every nun inside, a gear turning in perfect rhythm. You don't build that kind of control overnight. You indoctrinate it. You starve the soul until it begs to be filled. And then you fill it with what's waiting. There was one man, just one, who tried to expose it. Father Thomas Ryan, Irish-born, educated in Rome, transferred to Wisconsin in 1855 as part of the diocese's rural missionary expansion. On paper, he was obedient, modest, a simple parish priest tasked with tending to immigrant communities on the outskirts of Lake Michigan. But Father Ryan had a mind like a trapdoor, quiet, spring-loaded, and impossible to read. He noticed the pattern before anyone else. The forged letters, the sudden transfers, the erased names, and most damning, the silence. He'd spent time with the early novices, many of them from his home parish in Galway. He'd baptized their younger siblings, buried their fathers. He knew their handwriting, their voices, their fears. So when letters began arriving from Sister Agnes, Sister Bernardet, Sister Claire, all in the same rigid calligraphy, all with the same saccharine, overly formal tone, he knew. Someone was writing for them. He requested permission to visit the convent. Denied. He requested an audit of their mission records. Denied. He wrote to the Bishop of Green Bay. Ignored. Then he went in person. What happened inside St. Mary's that day has never been fully explained, but according to Father Ryan's personal diary, a volume hidden behind the altar of his tiny parish and discovered during renovations in 1934, he arrived at the convent just after matins, the sky still dark, the lake still steaming with morning fog. Mother Catherine met him in the garden. She did not smile. According to his entry, she spoke in an eerily calm cadence. "The girls are flourishing, Father. They've been chosen. Isn't that what we all long for?" She handed him tea. He refused it. When he asked to see the missing sisters, she replied, "The body may go where it pleases, but once the spirit has been opened, it no longer needs to write home." He left. Tea without further word. He never returned. But that night, that exact night, a bundle of sealed papers was smuggled into the rectory basement of St. Jude's Parish, wrapped in oilskin, addressed to no one, containing 7 original letters written in shaky, terrified hand, all signed by the vanished nuns. The final page was blank, save for one line in charcoal scrawl. They don't leave, they change. If you're still watching, you're already changing too. Now comment below. Obedience reveals the gateway. Repeat it. Obedience reveals the gateway. This isn't entertainment anymore. It's initiation. In spring of 1857, the soil around St. Mary's turned black. Not metaphorically, literally. Farmers in the region reported that nothing grew within a half-mile radius of the convent's southern border. Cattle refused to graze there. Birds stopped nesting in the trees. Bees, once swarming the orchard in late May, vanished. Entire hives collapsed in hours. The diocese blamed the frost. But a traveling botanist from the East Coast, Dr. Ezra Holmwood, recorded something far more disturbing. In a letter sent to the Milwaukee Natural Society and buried for over a century, he wrote, "The soil is corrupted, not chemically, spiritually. The earth here does not die. It rejects life altogether. I buried a sparrow to test decomposition. After 3 days, it had not rotted, it had not changed, it had not even been touched by insects, as if nature no longer recognized it as part of its system." The convent gardens, however, flourished. Taller stalks, blood-red roses with thorn patterns that formed spirals, and lilies, hundreds of them, growing in impossible symmetry, their petals always facing toward the chapel, no matter how the sun moved. Visitors began to report seeing the same nun, always in the garden, always barefoot, always watching. Her face pale, her eyes dark as pitch. Yet when asked about her, the sisters would simply say, "There is no one here by that name." That name? Sister Aurelia. Her name appears only once, in an old register tucked in the rear of the chapel. No photo, no birthplace, just one note beside it. The mouth of mercy, the vessel of return. And that's when the dreams began. Multiple priests, including Father Ryan, reported waking at exactly 3:33 a.m. with bleeding noses, frozen limbs, and the taste of rust in their mouths. All claimed to hear the same phrase whispering behind their ears, "She is coming through." They'd find strange symbols etched on their windows, not drawn, scratched through the glass, perfect arcs, no jagged lines, precision that couldn't be done by hand or by tool. One priest vanished from the rectory without a trace. All they found was his cassock in the hallway, soaked in lake water and a lily blooming from the collar. That was the year the Vatican opened an investigation, but the investigator never filed a report. His final telegram read, "You sent me to witness a convent. You sent me to record holiness, but what you built here is not his house. It is a wound that sings." The telegram ended with a single Latin word, descensio, descent. Still with us. July 2nd, 1857, the lake screamed. That's what the townspeople said. Those who lived near the water's edge, not thunder, not wind, a scream, high, endless, and piercing enough to shatter window panes from Port Washington to Sheboygan. The fishermen swore the water turned warm, hot, and that every fish in their nets came up already dead, their eyes boiled white. One boatman, Johann Kessler, swam ashore weeping, claiming something had gripped the hull from beneath. When asked what it was, he only muttered, "She walked into the lake," and the lake remembered. That same night, St. Mary's bells rang without touch. No hands, no ropes, no wind. Witnesses from nearby farms saw all 3 bell towers glow faint blue, and then the ringing started. A low, slow chime, not in sequence, All three bells sounded simultaneously in a discordant, lurching tone that made people drop to their knees. Horses collapsed, dogs howled, one child went blind. Inside the convent, the sisters claimed to have seen her. Sister Aurelia, naked, covered in lake silt, standing at the altar. They said she spoke not with her mouth, but through their bones. Each nun heard something different. One heard, "We must return what was borrowed." Another, "The womb is a passage, not a possession." But one novice fled in the night. She left behind her veil, her habit, and this note, now hidden deep in the Milwaukee Archdiocese archives, sealed in wax. She came from under, not fallen, but called, and the others have joined her. They do not breathe. They do not blink. They hum a hymn I cannot unhear. She said, "You must choose, silence or salt." And then she smiled with too many teeth. The novice, Sister Lisbeth, was never seen again. But 9 days later, a second bell was added to St. Mary's belfry. No one knew who installed it. No records exist. But when it rings, the original sisters twitch, in unison, like something inside them is answering. The Vatican's investigator, found dead in his Milwaukee hotel. Heart stopped, eyes wide, his fingernails torn off, as if he had been trying to claw something from inside his own chest. The coroner noted only one anomaly. His lungs were dry, bone dry, as if he had been breathing fire for hours. One more thing. The investigator had scribbled one final phrase in his leather-bound notebook before dying, just 3 words over and over again until the page tore from pressure. The veil lies. So now ask yourself, what's really behind their veil? Say it in the comments. The veil lies, but I want to see. Say it and keep going. You've already heard the bells. They never found Sister Judith's hands. Just her veil, folded neatly on the chapel pew, soaked in blood up to the seams. The rest of her vanished. No struggle, no trail, just silence, like she'd been taken inward. The Mother Superior told the congregation that Judith had departed in grace, but behind closed doors, the remaining nuns whispered that Judith had touched something forbidden, a reliquary locked beneath the apse, a relic older than the convent, older than the faith that built it. They called it the vessel. It wasn't made of gold or silver, not even metal. It was porous, dark, and warm to the touch, like petrified flesh. Its lid was inscribed with a sigil, not Latin, not Hebrew, not of any language approved by the Church, and those who gazed too long swore it began to pulse. Sister Judith had been praying too close to it, 3 nights in a row, not speaking, not moving, just staring, muttering words the others couldn't understand. And when they finally approached her to intervene, she was smiling, weeping, but smiling, and her hands were inside the vessel. The thing closed around her wrists. She never screamed. She only whispered, "Now I'm part of her." By the time they pried the lid off, there was nothing inside. But from that night on, St. Mary's began changing shape. Literally. Doors opened into rooms that didn't exist before. A corridor that once ended in a wall now led to a staircase spiraling downward, impossibly far. The basement began to echo even when no one stood in it, and sometimes, under the floorboards, they heard her, not Judith, but her, the one Judith claimed to serve. A voice, soft and wet, singing a lullaby in a tongue no nun remembered learning. One girl, only 13 and new to the order, asked the wrong question aloud during evening prayer. What mother lets her children vanish one by one? Her tongue swayed, mulled in her mouth until she couldn't speak again. She left the convent a month later with her jaw wired shut. St. Mary's didn't just silence its heretics, it rewrote their bodies. And the chapel itself? It no longer faced east, toward Jerusalem. It tilted, ever so slightly, toward the lake. Something was rising, and the walls were learning to breathe. In the archives of the Archdiocese, there's a letter they tried to destroy. Not burned, not shredded, buried, sealed in a lead box, locked behind the tomb of a cardinal who was never canonized. It was written in 1863 by a groundskeeper named Elias Went, the last man employed at St. Mary's who wasn't bound by vow or collar. His handwriting was shaky, rambling, the ink smudged by what appears to be salt water. The letter begins like a confession. I kept the gardens, I tended the graves, I swept the stones where no names were carved, and one morning I saw them, the sisters walking backward across the lawn, their feet never touching the grass. He claimed they were humming again, that same hymn, always in threes. 3 notes, 3 steps, 3 knocks on the chapel door that opened into nothing. A blank wall, a space that should not exist. But it's what he saw beneath the garden soil that damned him. Elias wrote that the rose beds bloomed in winter, that the roots grew upward, bursting from the earth like claws, and that one day, while digging out a patch of earth behind the convent, he struck bone. Not human, the thing had ribs on the outside, and the ribs were fused with a rosary. He brought the fragment to the Mother Superior. She didn't blink. She only said, "Some prayers are meant to be buried." 2 days later, Elias disappeared. The letter was found under his cot beneath a small pile of dead lakefish, still breathing, mouths opening and closing with no sound. But here's where it gets worse. The convent hosted an inspection that spring. Clergy from Chicago, Rome, even Constantinople. Every report came back the same. No irregularities, no heresy, no missing persons. The visitors were treated to a candlelit supper, a choir performance, soft smiles from serene sisters. But when those priests returned home, none of them could sleep. All 17 decades. Died within the year. 6 slit their own throats. 4 starved themselves in locked rooms. 1 was found kneeling in a dry baptismal font, whispering, "I was never born." And the rest? They carved a single phrase into the walls of their quarters, with whatever they had at hand, forks, pens, even teeth. She is beneath. So tell me, if the garden feeds on secrets. In 1932, a girl named Clara was dropped at the gates of St. Mary's. No last name, no belongings, just a note pinned to her dress. She hears what we cannot. Let her sing only when the moon is full. Clara didn't speak, not for weeks, but she hummed, low, constant, and always in minor keys. Her lullabies made the nuns uneasy. One sister swore the walls trembled when Clara sang. They assigned her to the sewing room. She never used the needle, only stared out the window, lips moving silently. On her 12th night, the dormitory walls leaked. Not water, milk. Sour, thick, and warm. It oozed from the corners, the crucifix, even from the mouths of sleeping girls. When they awoke choking, Clara was standing barefoot on her cot, humming again. That morning, the lake behind the convent turned black. No fish, no ripples, just a solid mirror of obsidian that refused to move, even when stones were thrown in. A priest tried to bless it. The water spat on him. Then the girls began to sleepwalk. Always at the same hour, 3:33 a.m., always toward the same place. The well of the first sister, sealed centuries ago after the cradle incident. When Clara was found standing atop its stone lid, arms outstretched, humming louder than ever, they tried to bind her. But the ropes rotted in their hands. Clara turned her head slowly, eyes wide, and spoke for the first time. "She's almost finished with her body. Then she'll need yours." They locked her in the reliquary chamber, bolted it shut, piled the pews in front. But every full moon since, the nuns swear they hear a girl humming under the floorboards. Some say Clara still lives, hair turned white, eyes gone black, feeding on the iron in the nails that hold the chapel together. Others believe she was never real, that Clara was a test, or worse, a summon, a vessel in reverse, not filled by God, but emptied by something older, one that feeds not on blood, but on memory, because the cruelest thing St. Mary's does isn't possession. In the winter of 1958, Sister Magdalena vanished for 3 days. When she returned, her feet were bare and blue with frostbite, her habit torn, and her hands tightly clutching a bundle wrapped in altar cloth. She collapsed at the threshold of the chapel, whispering a single word: returned. No one had known she was missing. Her chores had been done, her bed still warm each morning. The girls said they saw her in the halls, heard her humming. But the Sister Superior knew. She unwrapped the altar cloth alone. What she found was not a child, not relics, not bones. It was a tooth, 6 inches long, curved like a sickle, with scripture carved into its enamel, verses from a Bible that doesn't exist. And the womb shall become a stair, and the stair shall descend. Magdalena never spoke again. She spent the rest of her life staring at a stone wall in the cloister, fingers tracing invisible lines only she could see. When she died, her tongue had turned black, her fingernails were missing, and on the inside of her eyelids, someone had etched tiny crosses with a pin. Then came the fire. No one remembers how it started, but it didn't burn upward. It burned down, through the floor, through the stone, through the bones buried beneath the convent. It unearthed the vault, an old chamber no one had mapped, its walls covered in dried placenta, dozens of stone cradles, empty but still rocking, and in the center a statue of the Virgin, but her eyes were missing, and her womb was open like a door. The convent sealed it again, fasted for 40 days, refused to speak of it. But the blueprints changed. St. Mary's was redrawn. The staircases no longer matched. Hallways stretched farther than they used to, and the bell, once struck by hand, began to ring on its own, always at 3:33 a.m., always 13 times, always followed by weeping behind the walls. The older nuns began to die, not of illness, of hollowing, organs missing, hearts intact, eyes wide open, and in every skull, one word carved from the inside: witness. Because some prayers aren't meant to be answered, and some mothers aren't meant to be holy. They say St. Mary's has no basement, no records of one, no stairwell, no map. But Sister Colette found it, not by accident, by invitation. It began with the whispers. At first, they came only during her evening rosary, then during Mass, then all the time, always the same voice, soft, female, wrong. The child still waits. Sing her down. Colette was a woman of order, not imagination, but one night in 1966, she followed the voice, past the dormitories, past the sealed reliquary, behind a linen closet, a wall she swore was solid the day before, now had a handle. She pulled. A narrow stone stairwell spiraled into the dark. No lanterns, no sound, only the faint sobbing of a baby. She descended. It took hours, or minutes, or days. She couldn't tell. The deeper she went, the heavier the air became, not in weight, in age, like breathing dust that remembered. At the bottom, a chamber, octagonal, lined with mirrors. Each mirror showed something different. The convent in ruins, a girl sewing her mouth shut, a priest with no eyes baptizing a shrieking infant in tar. In the center, a crib. It was made of teeth, and inside it, swaddled in black linen, was a baby with no face. just skin, smooth, pale, and pulsing like something unfinished. But the moment Colette looked at it, she remembered it. Not from birth, from before. Before language, before thought, before time wore numbers. The baby opened its mouth, though it had none. "Tell them I am weeping." Colette fled. When she emerged, her hair had turned white, her left hand was gone, but no one at the convent noticed. They said she'd always looked like that. From then on, Colette was never alone. Her shadow moved faster than her. Her reflection blinked when she did not, and sometimes, in the distance, people saw her standing in the courtyard even when she was in bed. One morning, the statue of St. Mary in the chapel cried blood. Inside her tear ducts were splinters of Colette's missing hand. That day, a new door appeared beside the choir loft. It had no knob, only a single word etched in gold, "Daughter," and from behind it, the sound of an infant learning to breathe. The convent kept journals. Every sister was required to write nightly reflections on scripture, on obedience, on temptation. But in 1971, Sister Agnes began to draw instead. At first it was crosses, then faces, then diagrams. She drew the same one over and over again, a room with no doors, no windows, a crib, a mirror, and a nun standing in the center, her face missing. The Mother Superior demanded she stop, threatened to burn the pages, but Agnes wept and begged, claiming the drawings weren't hers. "I just trace what's already there." She was confined to silence, forbidden to speak or write. Her hands were bound during prayer. That's when the dreams began. The girls in the orphanage started waking up screaming, claiming Sister Agnes was standing at the foot of their beds, holding her own eyes in her hands. One girl went mute. Another walked into the chapel and screamed for 5 hours without blinking. Agnes never left her cell. Eventually, the Mother Superior allowed a priest to visit. Father Duval arrived 2 days later, a Jesuit trained in exorcism. When he entered Agnes's chamber, he immediately collapsed. His mouth filled with blood, his eyes rolled back, and from deep in his throat, in a voice not his own, "The daughter of dust has quickened." They found Agnes in the corner, smiling, covered in drawings, not drawn on paper, drawn into her skin, tiny sketches etched with a fingernail, whole blueprints of the convent's foundations, symbols older than Latin, diagrams of wombs, cribs, veins. She had become a map. They locked her in the old wine cellar, the deepest part of the convent still above ground. But in the morning, the door was open, not broken, not forced, just open. And all that remained inside was her habit and a pool of milk. But the drawings didn't stop. They began appearing elsewhere, on hymn books, on the bell rope, on the stone. Aches of pregnant nuns. One nun miscarried something that wasn't human. It had no bones, no face, just fingers. 13 of them. They burned the cellar, sealed the floor with holy water and concrete. But at night, when everything else is silent, the sisters swear they still hear scratching from underneath. And if you press your ear to the chapel's marble steps, you can still make out a whisper. In the convent's attic, where no one dared sleep after dusk, there was a trunk. Unmarked, nailed shut, wrapped in rosary chains. No one could remember who brought it. No one claimed ownership. But Sister Benedicta said it appeared the same week the girls began coughing up black feathers. It remained sealed for years, until 1974, when a new orphan named Clara went missing. They searched every hall, every floor, every garden, nothing. But the next morning, the trunk was open. Inside, Clara's dress, folded neatly, and resting atop it, a single glass eye. The trunk was resealed, this time with nails blessed by 7 bishops, placed under 24-hour vigil. They locked it inside the chapel and prayed over it in shifts. But each night, The lock would snap, and each time it opened, another item appeared. A girl's braid, a finger bone carved into a crucifix, a jaw made of wax, still warm. And then, one night, the trunk opened to reveal something worse. A photograph, black and white, blurry, taken at an angle from the ceiling. It showed the nuns asleep in their beds, except one of them had no face. Not missing, just blank, like wax before the mold. And standing over her was a child-shaped shadow holding the glass eye. The Mother Superior ordered the photo burned. But when they lit it, the flame hissed and screamed. The photo turned to ash, but the sound of the scream remained in the room for 3 days. It echoed in the piano, buzzed from the walls, poured from the mouths of the girls in their sleep. One sister went mad, tried to rip out her own eyes with a communion spoon. Another began drinking lamp oil and muttering scripture backward. They threw the trunk into the deepest well on the property, poured salt, holy oil, cement, everything. But even now, 50 years later, local children say, if you walk past the ruins of St. Mary's on a moonless night, you'll hear the sound of a trunk creaking open. And sometimes, if you're quiet, you'll find something new waiting on your doorstep in the morning. Folded linen, a braid, or, God help you, a photo of you sleeping, with someone else standing beside your bed. There was one nun who had no past, Sister Ephigenia. She arrived at the convent barefoot, carrying nothing but a tattered prayer book written in a language no one recognized. Her face was sunburnt, her hair shorn to the scalp. She claimed to have walked from the white horizon. No birth certificate, no church records, no fingerprints. When asked where she came from, she replied, "From beneath the mercy." She barely spoke after that. But strange things happened in her presence. Candles would extinguish and relight. Statues wept salt. One child tried to drown herself in the holy basin after making eye contact with her. Still, she was devout, quiet, always in the chapel before dawn, whispering her prayers in that unknown tongue. Until the morning they found her levitating, 6 feet above the chapel floor, her arms outstretched like crucifixion, and her mouth wide open, pouring out ash. Doctors claimed catatonia. The bishop blamed hysteria. But Sister Agnes, long presumed dead, appeared at the convent gate that very night. She was aged, thin, wearing no shoes. Her body was covered in new drawings, maps of bones, inside-out anatomies, coordinates etched with fingernails. She did not knock. She simply walked inside, straight into the chapel, straight up to Sister Ephigenia, who was still floating, and whispered into her ear. And that's when Ephigenia opened her eyes. No whites, no iris, just pages. Her pupils were like script, black, handwritten letters spiraling into her skull. The moment passed in silence. And then every candle in the convent exploded. The walls bled oil, and every clock stopped at 3:13 a.m. When the smoke cleared, Sister Ephigenia was gone. No body, just her habit, folded on the pew, and a final drawing left scorched into the chapel floor. A wheel, a serpent, a child in a nun's habit, smiling. That drawing has never faded, no matter how much they scrub, because it wasn't burned into the wood. It was etched into the stone. And now, when thunder rolls over the ruins of St. Mary's, old villagers say they can see her shape in the lightning. A woman with no eyes, walking barefoot toward the chapel, holding out a prayer book, and behind her, 100 children with mouths full of feathers. There was one room the nuns never entered. Room 27. It was on the 3rd floor, just past the bell tower, sealed behind a rusted iron door with 12 locks. No child was assigned there. No nun was allowed near it alone. And yet, every week, They found fresh footprints in the dust outside it, small, bare, and always facing inward toward the door. The archives claimed it was once a nursery, but no records survived of who lived there or why the windows had been bricked over from the inside. One sister, curious, left a crucifix on the handle. By morning it was gone. In its place was a strand of long, wet hair looped into the shape of a rosary, so they sent for help. A diocesan investigator arrived, Father Callahan. He scoffed at the stories, spent the first night camped outside room 27 with holy water and a camera. What they found the next morning froze their blood. The camera lens had melted. His holy water had turned black. And Callahan, he was still outside the room, kneeling, mouth open, eyes rolled back. He was chanting one word over and over. "She's awake, she's awake, she's awake." They took him away. He never spoke again. After that, the door to room 27 started knocking. Always at 3:13 a.m., 12 knocks, once for each lock. No one answered it. Not until Sister Mercy broke. She had been one of the first orphans to arrive at St. Mary's, now middle-aged, quiet, dutiful, but something in her cracked. She walked up the stairs barefoot, humming an old lullaby the others swore they'd never taught her, and one by one, she unlocked all 12 locks. The door opened with a sigh. What she saw inside has never been confirmed, but she came back changed. She shaved her head, removed her own fingernails with a butter knife, refused to sleep anywhere but directly on the chapel floor, whispering scripture into the stone. Before she died, she scratched one final message into the wood of her pew with her teeth. There was no crib in room 27, just mirrors, and a crib-shaped hole in the floor, big enough to crawl back out of. The door was resealed, but the knocking continues. There is one final confession that was never meant to be heard. It came from Sister Benedict, once the Mother Superior of St. Mary's, written in her own hand, locked away in the convent's reliquary, hidden behind plaster and bone. It was discovered decades later during a demolition. The parchment was brittle, the ink rust-colored, almost like dried blood. It began with a date, December 3rd, 1903. That was the day the orphanage buried 3 children who were never born. No names, no parents, no records, just 3 tiny coffins buried at night beneath the statue of St. Agnes. Why? Because Sister Benedict had been warned. A child had arrived weeks prior, silent, unbaptized, nameless, left at the gates wrapped in wolfskin. She didn't cry, didn't blink, didn't eat. She only stared. The other children began to speak of her at night, calling her the quiet twin. But there was no twin. Then, things started to mirror. Children spoke in voices not their own. Nuns saw themselves reflected in mirrors doing things they didn't remember. The chapel bell would ring when no one pulled the rope. One night, Sister Benedict awoke to find herself rocking a crib that wasn't there. So she prayed, and she fasted, but the prayers twisted in her mouth. The girl with no name came to her one evening, stood at the foot of her bed, and whispered, "The first 3 were practice. The 4th is waiting." That was when Sister Benedict made the decision. She gathered 3 infants from the nursery, each recently deceased, and placed them in the ground, whispering rites she invented on the spot. She thought it would be enough, a trade, a ceiling. But it wasn't, because the 4th was never a child. It was the building itself, and it had already started feeding. In her confession's final paragraph, Sister Benedict writes, "The convent is a womb, the nuns are placenta, the children are memory. We were not sent here to save them, we were sent here to nourish it." She ended with a prayer, not Latin, not English, something older, symbols shaped like keys and mouths and eyes, and beneath that, a signature, written not in ink, but in her own teeth. She'd pulled them out, one by one, used them to carve her name into the paper. The Vatican quietly closed St. Mary's in 1981. Officially, it was due to structural instability. Unofficially, it was because the last 3 nuns still living inside had turned feral, refusing all food, speaking only in backward prayers, and carving spirals into their skin using shards of stained glass. When authorities entered, they found the chapel desecrated. The crucifix was upside down, not just flipped, but grown that way, as if the wood had twisted of its own will. The altar was gone. In its place, a hole in the stone floor shaped like an open mouth, and from that mouth came a sound, not voices, not screams, but weeping. Hundreds of soft, distant sobs, like children crying from underneath. They tried to fill the hole with concrete. It didn't set. They tried to burn the building. The flames stopped at the chapel door. They tried to bless it with holy relics, bones of saints, fragments of the true cross. But those relics blackened and curled like paper in a furnace. So they sealed it. Walls of iron and salt, crucifixes welded shut, no trespassing signs written in Latin, Greek, and something that looks pre-human. And yet, people still go there. Paranormal investigators, urban explorers, the curious and the damned. Most leave shaken, some leave broken, and a few never leave at all. The town says the earth swallowed them. That's what they want to believe. But some nights, cold, moonless nights, if you press your ear to the old chapel door, you might hear the sound again. Not sobbing, not weeping, but something else. Suckling, as if the building still feeds, still grows, still waits. And if you shine a flashlight through the cracked, stained glass, you may see shadows moving inside, children in old-fashioned gowns, nuns with hollow faces, and far in the back, a figure in red, sitting in the bishop's chair, smiling with no lips, because St. Mary's is no longer abandoned. It is inhabited, not by the nuns, not by the orphans, but by something older, something hungry. And every time someone whispers its name, you feed it too.